Hi, Surabhi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, and now I'm even better because I have the opportunity to interview you. So thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Would love to start with just an introduction of yourself to get a sense of what type of work you're doing with the EPA and also what inspired you to want to join an organization which is incredible like the EPA.
Well, thank you. It's a great question. It allows me some space to maybe do a little storytelling. I work for the EPA. I've worked for the EPA for about 20 years now in a variety of spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, I worked at the state and local level, some work internationally. But in terms of what inspired me, my father is from the state of Gujarat in India and was very inspired himself by Mahatma Gandhi. And he even thought about joining a land reform movement, not getting married and all that stuff. He changed his mind, but I think that idealism, that very, very real idealism that I kind of absorbed from him, guided a lot of my life. It continues
cool.
to do so. He's still around, he's still very inspiring.
Amazing.
But really, I think we were actually learning when I was growing up. He would read things to me from Gandhiji's life, Mahatma Gandhi's life, and I was like, yeah, right on. That's right. That's what we ought to be doing. And so I think that's guided me. I've been looking for ways to serve the underserved. When I was younger, I thought of it more in terms of how can I do things that impact basic human needs that really everyone needs: water, air, housing, whatever. And so I think that really led me in a very circuitous path to working for first the state of North Carolina's environmental programs right out of grad school, and then eventually working for EPA in the headquarters office and working on national issues and policies.
Very cool. So in what role did you start in at the EPA, and what was your focus area, and how has that evolved over time?
Yeah, thanks for taking me on a little journey back. When I started, I really had this idea that because EPA and Washington, D.C. more broadly is a place where a lot of people, it's like a nerve center, right? Whether it's the lobbyists or the activists or government or folks on the Hill, people are trying to make change happen. And I thought, that's it, that's my tribe. Even though it's a variety of tribes, it's people wanting to make change, right? So I was very attracted to that idea. I moved to DC with, again, very idealistic and wanting to make change and wanting to be with others that want to make change. And that's what happened. So first I started in the water program. I had been working in the water program in North Carolina. And so I had this opportunity that I heard about and applied to work at EPA in DC. And part of what I wanted was to be in a place where change was happening. Where I was in North Carolina was a very supportive place, working for the state of North Carolina. And I noticed I was sort of an oddity. I was kind of like, like a little mascot that kind of, patted me on the head like, oh, it's that Surabhi that always wants to make change happen. Isn't that nice? But it was different moving to DC, where really that was something you saw all around. People come to DC. Of course, there's people who live there and have lived there for generations. And there's a lot of people who come to make change happen. So that attracted me. Mm-hmm. First, I worked in our water program for a very long time in a variety of roles. I feel grateful. I almost feel like I grew up in the Office of Water as a professional. Mm-hmm. And then I got a chance to work for a number of different programs at EPA. I also kind of rose through the ranks, as they say, and eventually was selected into something called the SES Candidate Development Program, which is sort of allows you to work at the career levels. It's sort of the executive ranks. So just a real journey. I feel very lucky that EPA has invested so much in me, and I feel really lucky that I've had a chance to work interagency. So I had a variety of roles, including a lot of supervisory and director roles, and then eventually now really have worked interagency, worked on public-private partnerships. How do we bring resources from the private sector into the federal government? So just a variety of roles. Eventually I worked for the Office of Community Revitalization as the deputy director there. Then now work in the administrator's office, and I've been working for environmental justice work, kind of providing leadership on environmental justice, cumulative impacts, and community partnerships.
Very cool. It seems like you have such an incredible, broad range of experience. And it's also great to speak with someone who's worked in government for such an extended period and has really transcended throughout. Do you have any insight into what are some of the key skills or traits that you feel have helped you gradually continue to rise in the ranks at the EPA?
I think there's a couple things that have helped, and I think that sometimes I even need to be reminded of them. So one thing is have a mentor. In fact, have multiple mentors. And there was a period of time when I did, and then there was a period of time when I got more senior and I didn't. And I had to remind myself of the same advice. And again, I have a couple of really great mentors now, and it makes all the difference in the world to just have someone to bounce things off of, someone who can even help you see yourself and see what your skills and strengths are. And I try to pass that on and pay that forward and be a mentor to others as well. So that's one thing that comes to my mind. It's just sort of, you could give that advice to almost anyone. I think when it comes to government, I'm interested in having people that really care about public service, be in federal government, be in state government, local government. And I think that the one thing that we talk a lot about is know your why. And that, again, transcends government, but I think it's even more important if you're in government to really know, why am I here? What is the impact I want to have? And I think that has helped me incredibly to sort of tough it out when things are difficult, to know exactly why I'm here and why I want to continue to be here.
Very cool. And on the mentoring front, how does that formation usually transpire? Do you generally have a formal conversation with someone and ask them to be your mentor, or is it more of a natural dynamic? I think it'd be interesting to hear how those mentor-mentee relationships generally come to be.
Yeah, I think we have some really formal mentorship programs because we want to encourage mentoring in the culture. When I think about the most recent folks, I think with somebody that I just felt like, okay, this person takes risks. This person is a leader who's been at EPA for a long time. We seem to understand each other and have some good chemistry. And I'm just going to ask him, hey, can we do this? Can I meet with you once a month? Can we talk through some things? I'm in a transition right now. I'd really value your leadership and your experience. And he was happy to do it. Other times it's been, some kind of formal mentoring program. Right now I've been mentoring somebody for about 3-4 years. And we met through, just sort of through friends. But then in order to kind of support the agency and the EPA culture that wants to make mentoring happen, we said, well, let's enter into a formal mentoring program so it kind of counts, so her organization and my organization are participating. I think that matters too.
Got it. And are there any themes that in these mentor-mentee relationships you feel are more ubiquitously brought up? And I'm just thinking from a perspective of someone who wants to work in government or works for a relatively large organization to get a sense of what are some of the challenges or obstacles that these types of relationships can help one navigate through.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what you're putting your finger on is the notion that you can study government, and then when you get in any particular organization, any particular group within a large organization, there's a question of what's the culture. And I think where mentoring can really be helpful is those unwritten rules and helping people navigate them. So do you have a mentor, or have you had informal mentors over the years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a few mentors who help me just navigate situations where I don't have a clear idea on exactly the path to take. I have some sense, but in my conversations with other people, it generally helps to make clear what the right decision is in those more cloudy or gray type of situations. So maybe that also might apply to a formal professional mentor-mentee relationship, which I don't really have that, but I have many people I can call for guidance when needed, which I feel blessed to have.
Is there anyone you're mentoring right now?
Well, actually, no, however, I do have a few undergraduate students who are working for me, but I also definitely in those interactions always try and get a sense of what they're hoping to do longer term and how their work for me fits into that. Fantastic. And then provide opportunities for them to ultimately get to where they want, such as even coming to the conference fully funded, a few visits and things like that. But I guess in a way I am informally mentoring, And honestly, that is one of my favorite parts of entrepreneurship, the ability to like work with people and try and elevate
Great.
them. But
Fantastic. I'm sure you're an excellent mentor. It sounds like you have some experience with that question. I would say, I think where mentorship is particularly helpful, as you said, is in those uncertain moments, but also in terms of the unwritten rules. I think people helping us navigate whatever the organization is or the sort of path in life, whatever we're trying to navigate at that moment. But I think that's really great advice that people have given me and that I give others.
Well, thank you. That was great. And now shifting gears slightly, another thing I've always wondered as well, for people who have worked in government for a long time, revolves around, and I also worked at the DOE, but not for a very long time.
Okay.
Revolves around what happens when an administration changes.
Right.
And I know you work a lot with trying to enact longer term results and changes that stay in place. So would love to hear like how changes in administration impact the workflows and like how you've navigated those, as well as specifically on like policies and how you approach policy with also the knowing that a new administration might not necessarily want that policy. So how you navigate that element of it as well.
Yeah, I might just give a couple of examples.
Amazing.
One that's from a few administrations ago, and then one that's from the current time right now. It's a work in progress right now. So in the Obama administration, there was an interest in EPA to sort of take almost like a brownfields approach to water, taking waters that are degraded and really engaging with communities to turn those around, to turn degraded waters into, treasured places, treasured centerpieces of the community. And that was really ambitious, but it was already happening in communities around the country. And the idea was, what could EPA do to be the wind at the back of these communities, to support them with the authorities we have and the resources we have? That led to something called the Urban Waters Federal Partnership, which ended up being one of the very, very few community-based, place-based initiatives that lasted not one, not two, but three administrations, okay? It's one of the very few that doesn't have a budget line item from Congress, doesn't have any regulatory basis, it's voluntary, but has lasted. And when I think back about what was it, actually Dr. Steve Kellman, from Professor Steve Kellman, he retired from the Kennedy School, he interviewed me, I remember, for hours and hours, and interviewed some of my colleagues to sort of say, what's the secret sauce, as he was asking. And I feel like when I look at that, I think that, why did it last? Why has it lasted so far, knock on wood? One thing is it was interagency. And so when you have a new administration come in, it's very easy for them to sort of say, what is this thing? Why are we even doing it? But when we engage them and help them, if you're new to an appointee job, right? You're the new, deputy secretary of something or other. And if you're invited to an event and you ask, well, who's going to be there? And if it's just something where it's all EPA people, you're like, okay, it's on my list. But if it's also a chance to meet your your political counterparts in other agencies and see where you can work together, well, first of all, it's going to help you do your job. It's going to help you network across the sub-cabinet or whatever level you are. It's also going to help you see how these different agencies come together to serve the community. So when people are put in that position, you're a new appointee, maybe there's an administration change in January, maybe the new appointees are in by July, and one of the first things you get to do is go to a really compelling event where you can see how you can work with others to serve the community. I mean, that's what people call line of sight. That's really exhilarating. And you remember that. You may not remember the 50 PowerPoints that someone briefed you on, but you're going to remember that, hey, one of the first things I did when I came to this job, to federal service, was I was able to go out on the Anacostia with people from USDA Forest Service, with people from DOI, from Interior, with people from HUD, and we were able to think about how we could work together to serve the community. So I think that's one thing that's very helpful, is give people that line of sight, give people that opportunity to work together. The other thing that I find really helpful is, if you want change to last, having culture, thinking about the culture. And who holds the culture? It's not the politicals that come and go. It's the career people, which, if you did some work at DOE, I don't know if you worked for a political or for career folks, but, to the extent that we can engage the people that are going to be there, throughout administrations, those career managers, especially at the higher levels. That's the ballast. That's the ballast of the federal government. Those are the people that if they feel like they can see why this is a good idea, and if they can help us implement it in a way that makes sense in the federal government, that's much more likely to last. And then the third thing, so there's the whole, give people a good experience coming out of the gate. Number 2, engage the career folks that really know how to make it part of the DNA. And then the third thing, I'm just going to ask you to look around this room and say somebody gave you this room for 4 years and you want to come in and make some changes to make it like yours. What would you change here, Karan? What would you change in this room?
That's a good question. Definitely not the windows.
Okay.
Because they're beautiful.
So you like the windows. You're going to keep something good. Okay. That's a change or that's a decision.
I think this table's a little too high.
Okay. You're going to change the height of the table. One more thing.
I would remove that chair because I feel like it doesn't have much use case, and maybe replace it with a couch, a small couch.
Okay. You're going to give yourself a different kind of seating.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. One thing I noticed you didn't mention was you didn't talk about changing the plumbing or the electrical wiring. And if you think about it, that's the infrastructure that's really not sexy.
That's a good point, yeah.
But if we want to keep something in the government or in any organization, if we can change the systems that we don't even question, if we can make it kind of part of how we do business, if we can make it part of the SOP, as they call it, standard operating procedure, when the new people walk in, they're not questioning the wiring, they're not questioning the plumbing. So if you want to really change something, changing those systems, the infrastructure, again, it's not flashy, it's not sexy, but that creates permanent change. So an example.
I was just about to ask.
An example is right now, people always say, okay, if I'm from the Office of Water at EPA, I have certain things that I can do. They're under the Safe Drinking Water Act, they're under the Clean Water Act. I might say, well, why don't I collaborate with this person over in air? Why do we do this project? And why aren't the air folks or the Superfund or other folks coming in? Well, they have certain things that Congress have given them authority and appropriations to do. Mm-hmm. So that's what they're going to do. What that does, though, it leaves the community in a really weird space. It leaves the community in a space where it's like, well, okay, so you're covering water, you're covering air, and you can't talk to each other, and I've got to go to 15 meetings to cover transportation and housing, and that's not a great way to deliver service to a community. And what we are able to do right now is we are in the process, is happening in real time kind of deal. We're developing something called the Community Action Roadmap, which is going to be like, okay, when we go, all of us different people talk to communities at different times. If we're going to Chelsea, Massachusetts, right? If we're going to Chelsea, let's make sure that every time we meet with them, we're actually taking into account what they're saying, but building a roadmap that reflects their desires, enacts their vision, and that EPA is being responsive to that in our lane. And where it makes sense to work with some other federal agency, that's documented too. The way that we're going to do that is through a docket system. If you come in as a political, the first thing you want to change is not usually some information IT system, right? Mm-hmm. Usually you're changing some policy or trying to, de-emphasize or emphasize something. You're not usually saying, let's change how the docket system works, which is a docket system is like, information flows from Surabhi to Karan, from Karan to so-and-so.
Yeah.
That's not usually what you're changing because it's infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So I think to the extent that we have an infrastructure at EPA that allows us to bring together the different things we're doing in a community, document that, and then be accountable to it. So we don't just go back to Chelsea and say, hey, let's have a listening session without doing our homework, looking in that system and saying, okay, so the Superfund program was there 2 years ago, the EJ program was here 2 weeks ago. Let's not go out to that same community again without doing our homework, without reading all of that. Let's not be extractive of the community. So there's a policy change, really, that's essentially related to an infrastructure change. Now that we have this information system, we don't show up in the community without doing our homework. We don't waste their time asking them to repeat the same things over and over again. So that's a very powerful thing where you have something that really is a ID system, but it's going to make potentially a really serious, significant change in our accountability and transparency.
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense.
I'll let you know how that goes, by the way.
Please do.
Yeah, we're working on the project right now, and I think time will tell. But in a year or two, maybe
Yeah.
even in 6 months, we'll be able to
I
share
feel
more
like
with you.
that makes a lot of sense, because then also when a political appointee is able to like have that transparency to see what types of projects have already been executed, it's not like a political appointee, even if they disagree
Exactly.
with the bill, will want to waste resource on
Right.
like doing something that maybe just didn't work already. And very cool.
We're kind of giving them the maximum opportunity to make informed decisions. So they don't just show up in Chelsea and say, okay, I think this ought to be done. It's like,
Yeah.
well, here's what the community said, here's 20 years of work, different parts of EPA. Oh, we have some investment here from DOT as well, want to make you aware. Okay, now they can make smarter decisions, more informed and accountable decisions.
Can we apply this to the IRA and how
Sure.
we think that might be impacted if, which is a big if, there is a change in administration? Like, how would this or these types of lessons apply to the IRA in your opinion?
So if we have a community action roadmap, if we have a docket system that has all the information, our grants would go in there too. So if we have a grant funded by the Inflation Reduction Act that you're talking about, that would be in there too. So let's say you and I, just name a place that you might want to, let's pretend we're going to work somewhere. I've mentioned Chelsea just because it's not far, but just name
Any
a place. Yeah, name a place that you can imagine the EPA working and you're curious about.
Miami.
Okay, let's take the city of Miami, right? And one of the things we can do is, let's say that they had a grant, any grant from EPA. Oftentimes, one of the tricks that you can use to find out what kinds of federal funding they have received, not just from EPA but others, is you can go to the comptroller's office. So we did that one time. We were working with the city of Baltimore. And one of the great things is none of the federal agencies have the entire list of who's giving them funding, but their comptroller's office in Baltimore, they gave us a list when we had a federal partnership meeting to support them. They just said, yeah, here are all the different places we've gotten funding. So in the case of a community action roadmap and a docket system, we would be able to say, yes, they got this grant, here's what they did with it. And it would be whether it's IRA funded or funded under some other existing authority, all of those grants would be in the system. So we'd be able to see what are all the different grants that the city of Miami got. And in that system, we'd be able to put, every grant they got from EPA, certainly. But we could even go further.
And how do you think that would impact a new political appointee's perspective exactly?
So right now, in most federal agencies, a new appointee comes in, they hear about an issue, maybe they go do a listening tour, they come back, and they are basing decisions on what they saw personally, right? And what they heard maybe from their staff in a briefing beforehand. Now what we're doing is we're giving them a level of sort of breadth and depth. We're saying, yeah, what happened in the last 10 years, 20 years? So I would like to think, especially because this is documented, again, it's a community action roadmap. So we're saying, what are we hearing from the community? We're building this kind of roadmap for EPA's work. They can build on that instead of sort of just saying, well, the only data I have is a snapshot of what I personally saw. And that's not a lot to base things on, right? So now they've got this depth of information, this sort of trajectory, here's the direction the community's going, instead of just sort of doing their best intelligent guess, which could be a brilliant idea, but it's not informed by much. It's informed by whatever they heard in a briefing. So this is an accountable system, and we're really excited about the change that it could create, because yes, a appointee coming in has so much more to go on to make more informed decisions and to make decisions that essentially are more responsive to the community, but also respectful of them enacting their own vision for their future.
Yeah, I think there might be a perception out there that political appointees might come in and just have their own agenda and want to implement that without taking into account the work that has been done. But it seems like instead, usually what transpires is a political appointee is pretty cognizant of how they can make the most impact given the work that has been done till date, even if it doesn't necessarily align with their agenda, and then retailoring that to potentially align with their agenda, but at least being cognizant, not super disruptive.
That's it. So I think it's a both and. If I'm an appointee, I have certain things I'd like to accomplish. And I'd like to do them in a way that's well received by the community, right? So now that you as staff or you as a system are giving me more information about what the community cares about, hopefully I can make better decisions, still in keeping with my agenda, still in keeping with the direction I want to go. Just as an example, let's say somebody comes in and we have an administration that really is interested in faith-based. And if you see that, okay, this community hasn't said anything about faith-based in their community action roadmap. This other community, they're talking about a council of churches, they have an ecumenical group that works on stormwater. Okay, well that's obviously a better place for me to advance my agenda. Somebody else might come in and say, I really want to see public-private partnerships. And again, when you look at the roadmap and you see, okay, these folks are already collaborating with a private sector partner, okay, these are better places for me to advance my agenda. So it's not that I'm not going to advance my agenda, I'm just going to do it in a more informed context. I think that's what I heard you say.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah.
So it actually helps everybody.
It's an interesting perspective to like approach even an environment where both sides might be on completely different sides of an issue, yet thinking through the lens of one side might not necessarily be malintentioned, so they want to, yes, have a different agenda, but still at least try and leverage what's been done in an optimal way, which I don't think people think through that lens as much. Maybe I'm just projecting like my own my own thoughts into this, but really interesting, and also I think provides some perspective into like how in actuality a bill like the IRA might be impacted if there isn't like a major legislative change. Could you speak some to the career government civil servant versus the appointee, and like how the structures kind of work in terms of like I know there are assistant secretaries who are generally appointees, but then they usually manage civil servants. So I think understanding that dynamic deeply might also help people understand how a new administration might impact a significant policy at the executive level.
I remember there was a guy at EPA that had this kind of like a file drawer, and he just had a ton of different ideas in there. And every time there was a new administration, he'd listen to what their platform was, think about what they wanted to advance, and he'd take idea number 27 or idea 150, and he'd just pull out the ones that he felt like this administration could move forward. And I think that's a really physical way to answer your question is, you know, we as career people, I'm a career person, right, 20 years, and our job is to support whoever's here in the White House, whoever's here as the appointee, figure out what they have to offer the agency, figure out, I mean, our mission doesn't change. The EPA's mission is to protect human health and the environment. So whoever comes in, they might have a different emphasis. Some folks might be interested in you know, more rule of law. That's really important to them, or using sound science. That's really important to them. For somebody else, maybe it's voluntary programs. You know, we've had a lot of different people come in with different priorities, but in the end, I think the job of us as career folks is the connective tissue between the politicals and what their vision is, and then the agency's mission, and making sure that we figure out, hey, what's the best way folks that have this agenda, this motivation, this vision can help move our agency's mission forward. So I think that is a dance, right? That's something we do together. And we do it really because that's our job. Our job, you know, we are really here to sort of make sure that the statutes, the laws are implemented, but also to make sure the political leadership, that we guide them, help them avoid pitfalls. Some of them might come from outside. Most of them come from outside of government, right? So if so, we're also trying to help them sort of steer clear of any landmines because they want to be effective. They don't want to end up in trouble. So there's certain rules. And of course, you know, most appointees have an orientation that helps them. It's not unusual to pair a political with a career deputy. And oftentimes that career deputy's job is to help them navigate. I mean, somebody might be a professor. Somebody might be coming from Capitol Hill. Somebody might be coming from industry. And so it's an entirely different infrastructure, and help them sort of make their way, help them figure out what the levers are, different ways that they can achieve what they want. And we serve as advisors to them as well as enactors of their vision. So the
Very
career
cool.
and the political, it's like, we work together ideally.
Yeah, such an interesting dynamic. Well, that was very helpful, and it's nice to speak to someone who has like that type of experience. And also, I feel like you've probably seen the climate legislation and ambition and hopes within the U.S. like go through many different evolutions over your 20 years.
Absolutely.
Could you speak to some of that, and like how are you feeling it's evolved over the past few years? Is this like as hopeful as people have been depicting and transformative? Like what is your sense of how the energy has shifted and like the legislations have shifted, and what is your sense of that element?
Yeah, I remember a time when we couldn't really talk about climate change very much, and it wasn't that long ago. And even within that same administration, we went from not really being talking about it, and then the IPCC report came out. And all of a sudden, it was an external force, right? It wasn't like we were generating something. But I think that's another thing to think about is political leadership is still being responsive to what's going on outside of government. And so all of a sudden we could talk about it because it was a really important body of work that was issued and available. And all of a sudden we could talk about it. Now, that was around the time of political change, but it was before the political transition. And I was amazed to see the difference of how a report could actually change the reality of what we could talk about and work on. So I just want to emphasize that we often talk about government, in terms of how do we work with each other, how do we work with politicals. And I want to emphasize that there's a kind of an inside-outside piece here, right? That we can mobilize from within the government to engage and ask people for opinion and sort of bring them into our process. But at the end of the day, we are also driven by the forces outside. So let me give an example. I mean, that was one period in time, sort of closer to the beginning of my career at EPA. And then more recently, we see an unprecedented ability to act on climate, resources to work on it, and resources to work on climate in the context of environmental justice. So that's historic. Not just the direction, but the level of funding. EPA has never seen a level of funding like this. And so these are historic levels. We're hiring at a historic level. So these are things that fundamentally change what's possible. And in fact, one of the biggest challenges is to not think small anymore. And to not think defensively on, always like, what are we fighting? We can actually shift now with this level of resource and this level of support, we can shift from sort of fighting something to building something. And it's actually the hardest thing is to get rid of that scarcity mindset of we can only do this because we don't. I mean, for so many years we've been piecing together like, a couple of dollars here and a couple of dollars there and try to see what we can do. And funding's not the option. The option is how do we do this effectively? How do we take this historic amount of funding that may not come again, this historic level of support for both environmental justice and climate work? And how do we do something now in this moment that will have a lasting impact so that when those resources dry up, when the political direction changes, as it inevitably does, no matter which party is in charge, it's just, it's reality that things change. People's focus change in leadership. And so how do you make sure that that's still an impactful investment, that we make it in a smart way now?
Do you have any advice for young professionals who, given what you said, there's so much new funding in this space, which has created a lot of opportunity, and climate, in my opinion, is on one hand incredible because it reaches all different aspects of the economy. So as a result, there's so many different roles that one can take to get involved, but also that might lead to some uncertainty for people to figure out like, where do I actually fit in here? It might be difficult to like figure out that niche that might resonate the most with someone. So do you have any advice for a person who is thinking along those lines and trying to figure out where they can contribute the most?
I got this question yesterday at that fireside chat, and I wanted to sort of go back to a time when I was new to my professional life back in North Carolina, and somebody had organized an incredible Earth Day celebration and series of events. And they invited William McDonough, who of course is really known for his work on sustainability. And he said something really that stuck with me, because we often think, well, should I be an engineer? Should I be a business person? What should I do? What's the best way, to save the earth, or, save the environment, or the climate crisis? And I think that what he said is you need everyone. So if you really want to be a nurse, be a nurse, but just do so in keeping with these goals. If you really want to be somebody who does monitoring and evaluation, what are you passionate about? What are you well positioned to do? Do that thing, because it's going to be something that'll harness your passion, harness your talents, and just do it with whatever that is, the climate crisis in mind, right? So I think that really struck me, because before that I was thinking, like, what's the right field to really impact this goal that I have of either serving the underserved or giving voice to those folks that don't have voice? How do I do that? And something really concrete like the climate crisis, I think it comes down to, like in your case, you've got this business background that you're going to have in addition to the work that you're going to know about government and public policy. What a wonderful combination. But I'm guessing that's an expression of what you're passionate about and what really seemed like a good fit for you. And then it's going to lead to other things. But for someone to say, okay, I know you're interested in business and public policy, but I really think you ought to be an engineer, an environmental engineer. That's the way you're going to, you're going to have a physical reaction to that, right? That's not my jam. So I think really recognizing that we're talking about it's going to take everyone. We mean it's going to take everyone. It's going to take everyone treating whatever field they're in as a lever for change. And I'll give an example. We're sitting here and I'm looking at the carpet, right? And I still remember, most days I forget my password, but I still remember William McDonough talking about a company that was making carpet in a certain way. And I think this might even be it, that basically people used to have carpet that would get worn out, and they'd rip it all up and they'd throw it out, and you'd carpet the whole place again. This was one of the first places that started like carpet kind of tiles, so you could replace the part that was worn out.
Genius.
And not replace everyone. I mean, that sounds so obvious now. He also talked about, and I don't remember the name, he talked about a company that had figured out their process of making whatever product it was, so that I think it was in Europe, and because he was giving an example of how regulation can drive innovation in business. And he talked about how, before they would have all these outputs that were like toxic, waste, and all this stuff, and dyes that resulted in having to, pay a lot of money to, or maybe you couldn't even dispose of it in the it was pre-EU, but you couldn't dispose of it in that country. That was the Netherlands. And basically they reverse engineered their entire process, and they got a process down so that the only things that were resulting from their industrial process of making whatever product it was water and some kind of biodegradable felt that you could actually put on your garden. So he talked about cradle to cradle, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking, that's not something that everybody's going to want to focus on. But these are the kinds of things that if you're passionate, if you're innovative, and you're making carpet, for goodness sake, but you can do it in a way that thinks about what the end goal is, sustainability, or whatever it is, the climate crisis.
Amazing.
So I just think come in through the door of your passion and your purpose, and then keep your goal in mind.
Amazing.
Because it's going to take everyone. Can you think, I'm going to ask you now, can you think of a profession where you absolutely can't do anything to really impact climate as an issue?
No.
You can't? You're just saying that to be nice?
Well, I feel like
Let's try.
it's all
Let's try to think of
connected.
something.
It's all connected, but maybe if I thought really deeply about it.
So I'm going to quiz you. I'm going to say a profession, and you tell me how they could improve how they could advance our climate goals, right? So, and I'm saying our climate goals like it's a thing, right? Okay. Kindergarten teacher.
Well, they're developing the next generation, and some of those students, all those students will work in an area, if my hypothesis holds true, that can't think of anything that doesn't impact climate. So they'll be in roles which directly impact it.
So what are the decisions that a kindergarten teacher makes that could impact those kids, their mindset, or even that class?
So largely it would fall under the umbrella of like what skills or character traits I want these children to value, and like teaching through the lens of that.
And if that teacher is passionate, when I talk to people, and we've been in workshops where people say, like, how did you get involved in the environment? Especially with people of color, how did you get involved in the environment? Almost every time, I found it fascinating. People go back to some mentor, some parent, some aunt who loved to garden, somebody.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a kindergarten teacher. Maybe, like, she picked snacks that were different, that were whatever. Just, you never know if you really are passionate as a kindergarten teacher about climate and climate change and the future. I have no doubt that of course bleeds into, but I answered it.
That's
I kind
amazing.
of built on your answer. Okay, let me give you another one. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna really work hard now to stump it.
Yeah, that was an easy one.
That was too easy, wasn't it?
That was too easy.
I'm gonna go with nurse.
That's a good one. But again, I mean, they're helping people, and those people are all connected to the climate, which maybe isn't that good of an answer. But
how about we work on that one? We'll just both think about it, because I don't even have an answer for that one. Even though I said
it is a good one.
I just waved my arms and said everybody can do it, but look at me, I'm gonna have to think about it. Maybe the fact is our profession isn't our whole life. Like, so you're passionate about being a nurse, and you have a whole life outside of being a nurse as well. And so don't decide that you're gonna become an environmental engineer because you care about climate, because there's more to you than being a nurse, but that being a nurse fulfills part of your life. I'm working on this now.
Same.
I'm thinking now I'm going to have to go away and be accountable and think about whether I said
I'm very bad
useful.
at balancing work and life.
You are?
I look at my work as like a pretty central part of my life and identity. But I do think that having balance is extremely important. So I would like to get more to a place where my work is less of my life. It's an aspiration. So
maybe that's why both of us probably are very passionate about our work, and maybe that's why we kind of miss the fact that that nurse, he or she probably has lots of things in their life they're passionate about, and if climate is one of them, maybe it comes through their work, but maybe it comes through in other ways. So civil society, we have so many ways that people make change happen. And, we talk in government about work, people that are voting, people that are volunteering in organizations. So I think it's a good reminder to people like you and me sitting in buildings like this that people's professions are one part, right, of who they are and how they impact.
Buildings where we don't want to change out the plumbing.
Right.
Or the windows.
So what's...
Well, one last question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
On a similar thread, if you could give, reflecting through the lens of your career, one piece of advice to your 25-year-old self and then your 35-year-old self, what would that be?
So it's the same answer I would give to my 55-year-old self.
Very cool.
And that is, don't go it alone. You need people on the inside that are making change with you, people on the outside that are also making change, that, you're all working together. It is, I believe, actually dangerous to go it alone. And that heroic leadership kind of encourages us. It's very tempting, but the advice I would give is anything you want to do, especially if you're somebody that's ambitious for change, really wants to make change happen, do it in a coalition. It's lasting. It's sustainable on a personal level, so you can maintain your health, you're sort of, you can thrive, right? You don't have to suffer. And also, it's sustainable at the personal level. It's also sustainable at the global level, or whatever scale you're working on, because the change that comes from working in a coalition is generally lasting change. So if your private sector partners have a bigger voice at a particular time, they're going to speak up. If at some point government has more agency, more resource, more funding and leadership, we can speak up. But when we have that kind of coalition, it really is more lasting. So just don't go it alone.
That's amazing. I've asked this question to many people, and I've never heard someone say, but I love it, that it would be the same as the advice to my 55-year-old self. Usually there are two different pieces of advice, but that's very unique, and I just resonate with it. So thank you for sharing.
My pleasure. Good to talk to you.
Thank you,
Thanks for having
Surabhi,
me.
so much. Thank you
Bye
so much.